Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my 2022 LEC Spring Split Power Rankings, predictions, analysis, all of that fun jazz. We are finally here to the LEC. This is my third Power Rankings and Analysis video. I have already done ones on both the LPL and the LCK. If you are interested in that, they are going to be up in the top right corner right now on the card. Go ahead and click on that if you're at all interested. You guys have been showing a lot of love to the channel recently with these Power Rankings, with these analysis videos, so I hope you guys are excited. The LEC ones are some of the most pressure to do because they are the biggest fan base in the world. I can say that pretty comfortably. So hopefully I can give you guys a video that you will enjoy. But I don't want to take too long to jump into it. Let's just talk about what's going to happen here in this video. If you are new, I am going to be going over all 10 LEC teams in this video, going over their strengths, their weaknesses, and where I power rank them. I will be going from 10th to 1st in my personal power rankings along the way. So we will be talking about the team that I consider to be the worst team in the league, all the way up to the team that I consider to be the best team in the league. If you guys are excited, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does help more than you guys know to let me know that you are interested in this kind of content. And obviously, I love hearing from you guys down in the comment section below. I know you guys like to get feisty in the comments and say a lot of stuff, so I'm happy to have that conversation with you guys. If you have any dissenting opinions or anything like that, I love talking about it down in the comments below. But let's not waste any more time. Let's jump right into our first team, the team that I have power ranked 10th in the LEC going into 2022 spring, and that is going to be Astralis. Now, what you're seeing on the screen here, if you're not familiar with my videos, I will go over for kind of from top to bottom what we're looking at. In the top left corner, you're going to see power ranking. That is where I personally power rank the team from 1 to 10. In the top right corner, you are going to see the consensus power ranking. I polled quite a few people from my Discord, more so than the LCK and LPL ones, just because more people know the LEC, to give me their power rankings. And I made an aggregate of that to give sort of a consensus opinion here. The outside of parentheses number, the 10 in this case, is going to be where they land overall, 1 to 10. Inside the parentheses, you're going to see a range of numbers that is going to encompass the highest place they placed and the lowest that they were placed in anybody's power ranking. So in this case, the highest anybody placed Astralis was 8, the lowest was 10. You're also going to be seeing all 5 players for the team on the screen with a little number next to them. That number does indicate where I power rank them within their position. Now, please listen to this. I have to say this in every video because people always take this out of context. I would much rather you listen to what I say than arbitrarily look at the number. The number, at best, is more of a guide than anything. It's more of just an indicator of kind of the range that I see somebody in. There can be situations in which a player can be ranked 9th or 10th at their position and still be a positive to their team. And I will happily talk about those situations, but just know that it's more of a visual aid than anything else. If you want to get really aggressive about something in the comments, I would much rather you get aggressive about something I say rather than an arbitrary number that I put up on the screen. I know it's a disclaimer I do in every video, but every video it seems that there are people that don't really care, so I try to make it every time. One thing I did not point out in my LPL review as well is the little star next to somebody's name, if there is one, does denote whether they are an import or not. I didn't say that in the LPL video, but if you see a star next to anybody's name in this video, it does mean that they are considered an import. Not that that really matters as much in the LEC as it does in like the LPL or the LCS, but it is worth noting. But now with all of the fun jazz out of the way, we can actually jump into our analysis of Astralis. So let's go over what their roster is looking like from top to support. In the top lane, it's going to be White Knight. In the jungle is Zanzara. In the mid lane, it's going to be Dior. At AD carry, it's Kabe. And then your support is Promiscu. An interesting roster, if not a little disappointing. They do bring back 3 members of this Astralis team that wasn't good last year. They weren't really projected to be good. They didn't turn out to be good. You know, just not a very great roster. They bring back 3 members, 3 of the better members. I'm not going to say the 3 best members, but 3 of the better ones. I really like bringing back Zanzara here. in the jungle. I think he was probably the highest upside player for them last year. He definitely was a big reason why they won games. Not necessarily the only reason, but a reason that they won games. You're also bringing back White Knight here in the top lane, who I do have ranked as the 10th top laner, but I don't think he's that bad. I actually think, you know, in most cases in all the other regions we've gone over, mid lane has been kind of the position where you can be 9th or 10th in the role and be pretty good still. I think for the LEC in particular, top lane is that position for me. I think top lane is probably the most stacked position in the LEC right now. And I think White Knight, while he's the 10th ranked top laner, he's not a terrible player. He's not a hard carry or anything like that, but he is consistent. He's not going to give you horrible performances. If he was on a playoff team, or if he was on a team that wanted playoffs, I don't think it would be that terrible to have him. I think he's just kind of your generic top laner. He's going to be fine. You're bringing back Promise Q as well. MSI world champion Promise Q here. He's fine, as, I think he gets a lot of memes, and he's, not always good. He's inconsistently good, is how I'll say it. I have him ranked 9th here. You could absolutely make the case that he's the worst support in the LEC, and I don't think I'd really bat an eye there, but I think he's shown at least flashes of being okay enough in the LEC for me to put him slightly above somebody else later on. As for your two players that you're adding, one is a veteran and one is very much not a veteran. You're adding Kabe here, the veteran coming over from Misfits most recently. He had a decent end to the summer split. He was kind of the weak, I don't want to say the weak link, but he was kind of the weak link of a Misfits team that did make playoffs. Basically on the back of Razork and VTO being really, really good. But Kabe's still, he's at one point been considered one of the better AD carries in all of Europe. Do I think he's there now? No, that's why I have him as the 7th ranked AD carry. But 7th obviously isn't bad. It means he's, a contender for a playoff team level kind of AD carry, and I think that's about where he is. He's still a little bit more passive than I think I'd like out of him, and especially on this team where I think you're going to need somebody to step up and kind of be that carry. I'd really like if he was given more resources and given more opportunity, but we'll see. One point of excitement that you could have if you're this Astralis team is in the mid lane with Dior here. This is a guy who's played almost no competitive League of Legends. He has played for just about a year competitively and is now in the LEC. It's one of the fastest growths from just starting your career to being in being in a major region that I've ever seen. And for him to get this spot here, I think is really, really cool, obviously coming in from Fnatic Rising, but I'm not sold that he's going to be very good right away. He was pretty good at EU Masters. He definitely held his own, and I understand why he would get this shot, but he definitely has some weaknesses. Doesn't have the most versatile champion pool in the world. That's definitely something that can grow. And obviously, the inconsistency is just going to be there as someone who hasn't played in a team environment for very long. This is a big stage to get tested on, and, I'm just not sure if he's going to be able to live up to that in spring split. By summer, do I think he could be a pretty solid LEC mid? Yeah, I think he definitely is mechanically talented enough to be that, but I don't know if that's going to be there in spring, at least for me. So where I see Astralis is a team with some pieces that I like. I like Zanzara. I say his name differently every time. Zanzara. I know how to say it. I like Zanzara and I like Dior. And as anybody who watches this channel knows, I think jungle mid is the most important duo in the game. So it's good to have that. White Knight's not terrible. I do think the bot lane is probably going to get a little bit outshone, especially if they're not given resources. Kabe is very lax in how he likes to play laning phase, and Promise Q isn't exactly known for his laning phase either, so I could see that being a little bit of an issue. And then I would also be a little bit concerned if Dior can actually live up in Spring Split, but that's why they're here at 10 and not higher up. The consensus put them as high as 8. I think that would be a really solid finish for this team, and that would mean other teams probably went wrong. But I think we can all agree that this probably isn't a playoff team. And, I just kind of wish they would have done more this offseason to improve a team that really wasn't that good last year to begin with. Moving on to the team that I have ranked 9th in my power rankings. This one might come as a surprise to a few people, but overall, I think this is mostly going to be consensus, and that is going to be SK Gaming, coming in here at 9. Their roster from top to support is looking like Gen X in the top lane, Gilius in the jungle, Certus in the mid lane, Jezu at AD carry, and then Treats returning to the support position. An interesting lineup here. I actually think they have pieces that I'm a little bit excited about. Not, throw away every power ranking thing that I have and, put them higher than 9th kind of excitement, but there are some pieces here. You're returning a few members. The positives I want to look at here, you do bring back Treats, which I think is a definite win here for SK. He was kind of their utility everything man last year. Played a little bit of support, played a lot of bit of jungle for this team as somebody who's really played support his entire career. He kind of stepped up when this team really needed him, and he played all right in that circumstance. I definitely think he is the most proven player on this team, and I think they're going to be excited to have him back. His laning phase at support has always been extraordinary, especially when he was in North America. He was really, really good in lane. Hopefully he can continue that this year with Jezu, who isn't necessarily one of these top-tier AD carries. Let's get into Jezu, actually. Jezu last year was someone who I was really down on going into the season because he was replacing Crownshot, and I thought Crownshot was just objectively the better player, and that was a downgrade, and, obviously Crownshot didn't want to play for SK, and you had all that stuff, but getting Jezu I didn't think was great. He was fine. Again, not someone who I would consider a strength to a really good team, but someone who I do think still is young enough to grow and does show, signs of being a good AD carry. I just don't think he's quite there right now. The other positive I want to talk about on this team is going to be Certus coming in here. Certus is actually a pretty good pickup and someone who I really did not expect a team like SK to actually be able to get, because you typically don't see lower end teams be able to get some of the more hypey, quote unquote, mid laners coming out of the regional leagues. I don't think he's necessarily as polished as someone like Reeker coming in, someone else also coming out of the regional leagues, but as an assassin player, I'm not sure there was any more exciting prospect than Certus on Misfits last year. Misfits, obviously regional league team, not their LEC team, but it's a good addition for SK nonetheless. I think he is going to come in and hopefully be the carry, quote unquote, on this team. I think he's going to have a couple of people to share those resources with, but when you're looking at top lane, you're looking at bot lane, I would much rather play through mid than either of those roles. Treats being such a good roamer, I think also helps this case a lot. I think Certus is going to have a lot on his plate in his first year with SK. But a lot of that is also going to hang on God Gilius here in the jungle coming in. He is just someone who I have almost lost all excitement on. I've never really been that excited about Gilius to begin with. He had a phenomenal 2020 summer, and that really was his split, where he came on and he propelled Schalke into the playoffs and really kind of made their season. But, before that, after that, he just really hasn't been much, has he? He gets replaced midway through last year with Kid A. Blah, 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 He's not someone that gives me that much excitement. A player who likes to have resources and who likes to carry. I think if you're SK, you can hopefully be excited that you have such a mechanically talented jungle mid duo here in Gilius and Certus, but I just don't know how well this is going to work out. Gilius taking all the resources has not really worked for many teams in the past, and I could definitely see a world in which SK just kind of falls into that trap here as well. I definitely think there were better junglers to get this offseason, and I'm not entirely excited about how Gilius fits into this team overall. You have Gen X in the top lane. He's kind of like a lot of other top laners I've talked about in other regions, just kind of meh. He's not really great. He's not awful either. He is someone who is going to be consistently stable for you. Not necessarily someone you want to give resources to, but also not someone that really needs resources in general. So overall, I think SK is fine. As you can see, I rank them 9th. The consensus also does rank them 9th, although someone did have them as high as in the playoffs at 6th and as low as the worst team in the league. So a little bit of a wide range of opinions here for SK Gaming. Could I see this being a playoff team if things go right? Maybe. I think they're probably the last of the teams that I would really honestly be surprised if they made the playoffs. I think the other teams ahead of them are just better, the 8 teams ahead of them. But, things could click. Certus could be an absolute beast in year 1, and Gilius might be able to find his form back. We could see Treats become one of the better supports in the league. I can definitely see upside for this roster. I'm just not necessarily... I don't think it's nearly as likely as other teams in the league hitting their upside. So for me, they come in ninth. They come in the bottom two. The consensus tends to agree. Hopefully Certus can hit his potential. They're kind of relying a lot on that, though, if they want to go ahead and make the playoffs. Moving on to the 8th team that I have in my power rankings. This might surprise a few people because the consensus actually does have this team in the playoffs, and I do not. But that team coming in 8th for me is going to be Misfits Gaming here. A team that did make playoffs last year, actually went 12-6 and had a pretty good split, but had a complete roster overhaul going into 2022. You are looking at, here in the top lane, Schlatan coming in the jungle, VTO returning in the mid lane, Neon at AD carry, and then Mursa at support. A very interesting team here. A couple things to talk about. First one, you want to look at the positives of this team. It starts with VTO. He was phenomenal last year. He was someone who I didn't have a ton of expectations for coming into the LEC, but he pretty much blew away any expectation I think anyone could have had for him. He was phenomenal. To be rated the 4th best LEC mid in only your 2nd year, I think is a huge accomplishment, and I think really does show how good I really do think that VTO is. He is if this team makes playoffs, which, like I said, I think SK was kind of the last team I didn't expect to make it. This team really could make it. I think in a real world, they could make playoffs. If they make it, it's probably because he has some MVP level season, which I could definitely see happening. He is phenomenal. He basically does everything for this Misfits team, but he had a lot of help last year, and it's a lot of help that he just really doesn't have anymore. You do keep Herit on this team, who I thought had a sneakily good season last year. Top lane's kind of a hard position to stand out in, but I thought he was good, especially towards the end of summer. I thought he really, really improved, and I think there was a real reason that he had a lot of interest in him this offseason from a lot of different teams, and so I think it's really, really good to bring back Herit here. I think that is a positive and something that I would consider helping this team, move forward in their playoff aspirations. Another positive addition to this team for me is Neon at AD carry, who I think has kind of consistently been a little bit underrated here. I think the AD carry pool in Europe is a little bit shallow now that the top 2 AD carries in the region are both gone in Reckless and Hansama. I think that it's kind of opened up the road to being one of the better AD carries in the region. I think a lot of young guys have come in this year to really prove their spot, and a lot of guys who have not necessarily been considered top guys are kind of hoping to be put into that position this year. I think Neon is one of them here for Misfits. He's kind of expected to be one of the better AD carries in Europe just purely because of the lack of top-end talent coming in this year. And I think if he can pull that off, if you can have a really strong mid lane and bot lane, that's going to help the jungle's job out a lot. And if Herit can, be, I wouldn't say that he was like a carry top laner by any respect, but he definitely put pressure on in the top lane last year. If you can have 3 really, really strong lanes, I could see this Misfits team definitely overperforming this 8th place spot. But where I'm a little bit concerned is going to be your more macro-oriented positions, your jungle and your support. So let's talk about Schlatan first coming in here. Schlatan was fine. He was not the carry for that Misfits team last year. That was Certus. And for him to come in here and kind of essentially be forced to be that, or at least forced to help facilitate that, with VTO, Neon, Herit, I think he may have looked a little bit better than he actually was. Obviously, they have a lot more information than we do, and I will say that with the support as well. They chose their guy, and that to me says that this coaching staff really likes him, and they really like what they see in him. I just haven't seen that in him myself yet. Obviously, can he become that? Yeah. I think pretty much anybody who comes up from the ERLs, I think if you perform well at EU Masters and in the ERLs in general, I think you can, you have the potential to be a good LEC player. I don't think the gap between the LEC and most of the top ERLs, and especially EU Masters, is really that big. And so, do I think Schlatan could come in and be a solid player on a playoff team? Yeah, I think he would really help this case a lot. Another really interesting piece here is going to be Mursa as the support. He was actually very late, he was the last announcement of any starter. We assumed it was going to be Vander here. If you watched my LEC offseason review and my grades for how each offseason went. I had Vander listed there. Everybody just assumed that Vander was going to be starting here, but they actually go with their guy Mursa instead here, which is really interesting. Mursa is someone who hasn't gotten a ton of huge exposure. From what I've seen from him, he just seems kind of like a fine support. He doesn't necessarily make a lot of mistakes, but he doesn't make a lot of flash plays either. I'm a little bit worried about that style going into the LEC, but, you know, a more consistent support might overall be a good thing for this Misfits team when you do have carries like VTO, Neon, fingers crossed, hopefully can be that on this team as well. And then Hear It even in the top lane can do it as well. But, you know, he just isn't someone that I would consider necessarily stand out in terms of his play. Maybe he can kind of change that going into this year, but I just wasn't super impressed by what I saw from him. Overall, this team is really, really solid at the top. Like I said, VTO is really good. I think Neon and Hear It are both capable, you know, LEC players. I am a little bit worried about Schlotton and Mursa, though, at least coming in immediately in Spring Split and just being kind of put into a position where this team wants to make playoffs. It's the reason I have them out of playoffs, is I don't expect them to click and to kind of be as good nearly as quickly as they'll need to be to get into the playoffs. But the consensus disagrees. As you can see, the consensus is that they will finish 6th, which means that they will finish in the playoffs. They were only placed as high as 6th, which they were placed the most often at. But they were placed as low as 9, so some people do think that they, you know, have a chance of bottoming out here. I can definitely understand that as well, but overall, I think this team does have talent. You know, obviously, it's kind of on VTO's shoulders to carry. I'm just not so sure that the rest of the team around him, is good enough to really kind of propel this team into a playoff spot when it's really just a one-man kind of system, in my opinion. That's going to go ahead and take us to our 7th power ranked team, the final team that I have missing the playoffs, and this one is just barely. I really, really wanted to include this team in the playoffs, but I just couldn't find a space for them. Coming in 7th for me is going to be Team BDS. Their first season here in the LEC, obviously, buying out the spot from Schalke No Fear last year. It's going to be interesting. I really, really like the roster they put together, though, so let's go over it from top to support. It's going to be Adam in the top lane, Syncroft in the jungle, Nuclearant in the mid lane, Xmatty at AD carry, and then Limit at support. This is a really, really intriguing roster for quite a few reasons. One, they did inherit Schalke's roster, as far as I'm aware, and so anybody who was under contract with Schalke did retain with BDS, so Nuclearant and Limit, I believe, didn't have to be signed. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section below, but I believe that is how that ended up working out. So you have Nuclearant and you have Limit, two of the more meh players from Schalke last year. Obviously, Nuclearant coming over in summer, at least starting in summer, because Abadage goes to North America, goes to 100 Thieves. And then Limit's kind of just been fine. I was actually kind of high on him when he went to Schalke. I really liked him a couple of years ago, but he had a meh 2021. Summer was just not a good split for Schalke in general, for pretty much any of the players, but, you know, they were fine. What's really exciting is that the rest of the team is made up of 3 out of the 5 players who were on K-Corp last year. Arguably the best ERL team that we have, best team from the EU Masters scene. First and foremost of those is, of course, going to be Adam, who got a call up mid-year to go play for Fnatic. So he was so touted that they actually had Bwipo switch to jungle. He had a really, really good summer split. He was very, very dominant in lane, just a very aggressive player. And I actually think that fits this team really, really well, as everybody else on this team, well, I wouldn't say is more passive. I would definitely say that Adam is the most aggressive, and I would expect him to get a lot of resources going into the season this year. But I think for them to, you know, obviously his fallout with Fnatic, I'm not going to talk about any of the drama. If you're here for me to talk about that, I'm not doing that. That's not what I do on this channel. But obviously the fallout with Fnatic happened. He is available. BDS swoops in and signs him, reunites him with a couple of his teammates here in Syncroft and Xmatty. Xmatty especially is someone who I actually am really high on. I really, really like what I see out of Xmatty. I have him listed as the 5th best AD carry in Europe from day one. I think he will be that. I think he's really, really underrated by the general League of Legends community, and I think he has the chance to be a scarily good player for this BDS team. And a big reason why I feel so much optimism is I think if you can get Adam to be one of the better laning top laners in the entire region, and then Xmatty can come in and form, you know, good synergy with Limit, and they can have one of the more, you know, one of the stronger laning phases in bot lane, I think that opens up a lot of the map for BDS to kind of do whatever they want and can hide some weaknesses maybe in some other positions. But yeah, I'm really high on Xmatty. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people with how good he is from day one. You're, of course, also bringing Syncroft in here, who I'm a little less high on. I'm high on almost everybody on that K-Corp team. He was probably the one I was least excited about. He just didn't stand out in the same way that I think Xmatty or Seiken or, you know, Kabashard or pretty much any Targamas, you know, I think everybody else on that K-Corp team was really standout to me, and I just didn't get that same kind of standout level performance from Syncroft. He was definitely kind of the quieter member of that team, but I think that works here when you have such a strong top and bot lane here in Adam and Xmatty, if, you know, obviously everything comes together. And even Nuclearant isn't a bad player. I don't think he's terrible. I just don't think he was particularly good last year. I think Syncroft being more of that laid-back, supportive style jungler, I think can be beneficial here. But we'll have to see. Obviously, the jungle meta is still bruisers, and if that's the case, you know, early invades and early jungle attention is going to be important. We will see if that becomes a problem. But overall, I actually really, really like what BDS did. I'm not sure you could form a better roster coming just out of almost nothing than this going into an LEC season. I think this is about as well as they could have done. Adam is an absolutely gigantic pull. I think Xmatty and Syncroft are also really good gets. And then Nuclearant, I don't think was terrible. And Limit is somebody who's had good moments in the past. So, do I think this team could make playoffs? Yeah, I do. I have them barely outside of it. I really wanted to put them inside playoffs, but I just couldn't quite find space for them. The consensus actually has them much lower. The consensus has them at 8th, with the highest actually being 7th. That is something I do disagree with. I think this team is going to outperform expectations, mostly because I simply think this bot lane will be better than people expect it to be. But obviously, you know, consensus is there for a reason, and Xmatty could come in and just kind of be meh, and I could be very wrong. But if I really do like what I've seen out of Xmatty, and I am hopeful that this team, early game-wise, can create enough leads that they're able to kind of close games out a little bit quicker, maybe than their macro game would suggest. But overall, BDS did a really, really good job this offseason. I like what they're doing. I like where they're going. I like that they're creating inbuilt synergy. If everything goes right for this team, I could absolutely see them making playoffs. That's going to go ahead and bring us to our first of our 6 playoff teams, at least my projected playoff teams here in the power rankings. This one is going to upset a lot of people, and I'm ready for the backlash in the comment section below. I'm very excited to receive it, but coming in 6th for me is going to be Rogue. I actually have them as low as 6, barely making it into playoffs, and I will explain why in just a second. But their lineup going from top to support is going to be Otoamne in the top lane, Malrang coming in the jungle, Larson in the mid lane, Comp as the AD carry, and then Trimby as the support. Kind of a disastrous offseason for Rogue, one that was kind of out of their control, but they lose their 2 best players, pretty much, by a lot. They lose Inspired here in the jungle, they lose Hansama in the bot lane. I'm really sad for them in that respect, because this is a Rogue team I really liked, but both of those players going to North America, you're replacing them with not a ton. We'll go ahead and go over what I like about this team. First and foremost, it has to be Otoamne. People are talking, people are going to get mad that I have him ranked 5th, but when you look at the top 4, I mean, you could realistically place him 4th, and I really wouldn't be mad. Honestly, 4 and 5 could switch places, and I think it would be totally viable, but when you're looking at, like, the top 3 top laners in the LEC, I just couldn't find a place for Odo in there. I have a little bit more upside on Adam, personally. If you want to say that Odo is a better player than Adam, I'm not going to be that mad with you. I'm not going to disagree with you or anything like that hard. I would totally understand, but for me, I just like the upside a little bit more. Odo's a really good player, and he's definitely the best player on this Rogue team. I think without a doubt, in my opinion. Top lane, like I said, is just a really stacked role in the LEC. You also are bringing back Larson here, who has shown really good moments in the past, but it's also kind of fizzled out in big moments, most specifically the playoffs and Worlds, really. He has not been somebody who has shown up when he's been, when the games matter the most. And that is definitely something that concerns me. I have him placed just below VTO in the list of mid laners, which I think is valid. If you want to rank Larson higher, I understand that as well. I think the Odo-Larson combo is kind of what is driving this team. And even then, I can poke holes in that duo itself. But the other kind of points that I'm excited about here, I do like them bringing in Malrang here in the jungle. I think he's probably going to be a little bit underrated in terms of how good he is right now. But he is a pretty decent player. He has shown kind of good things. A lot of people are going to remember him. A lot of people know him, obviously, from being on Damwon the past few years, but I remember him from the LCK a few years ago. I believe it was with Jin Air. I could be wrong, though, but I believe he's definitely played in the LCK before, and he was fine. I remember thinking he was okay. Someone who was kind of a bottom-tier LCK player, so he's probably like a mid to bottom-tier LEC jungler, I would say, comparing at least to the other people that are listed here. I think he could be a positive for this team. He's someone who could be really, really good. He has the mechanics to be really good. He just sometimes can play a little bit too passive. But hopefully he can kind of work that out. The LEC is definitely not a region known for its passiveness, I guess I should say. But this bot lane is actually something I'm concerned about. And it's probably the biggest reason why this team does come in 6th for me instead of 5th, is I actually think this bot lane is a weakness for this team for sure. You lose Hansama, you bring in Comp. I said this in my offseason review. I think this is the biggest downgrade that any team made from one year to the next in any major region going into 2022. I think you're going from arguably the best bot laner in the region to the worst, in my opinion, in Comp, who I think has just not shown that he can be a capable LEC bot laner at any point. He's played with a really, really good support for most of his career here in Lebrov, and he's still looked kind of meh. I am not high on Comp. I think he is going to heavily disappoint for this team. Obviously, you're kind of relying on him to be a decent player. I'm not sure I can expect that out of him. Obviously, if he can be decent, I think this team probably is better than 6th. It's just, I see this as a weakness. And then Trimby as well is someone who I really was not impressed with in his first year in the LEC. I thought Hansama did a lot of the heavy work in that bot lane, and I thought Trimby was caught out of position more than I would have liked him to be. He's someone who I think does play a little bit more of that aggressive style, which I give props for. I think that is a plus in the LEC, but he's also someone who I'm not sure has the macro to pull that off, like someone like Hylissang does, right? Where I think as an engaged support, you kind of have to make sure everything is all neatly tied into a bow before you make a decision. I don't think Trimby necessarily goes through all the steps like that, and he definitely gets caught out at points. His laning phase can definitely be a little bit suspect as well, so I'm actually really, really worried about this rogue bot lane, and it's the reason I have them 6th instead of 5th, but there is still positives on this team. Like I said, Odo is a really, really good player, someone who had arguably the best year of his career last year. Larson has shown really, really good things, especially in the regular season. And I do think there's a lot of upside for Malrang. I think he could potentially be a really good jungler. If it weren't for the bot lane, I'd be a lot more excited. But as you can see, the consensus actually has them 5th. I'm not surprised. But what I am surprised about is that I polled about 8 or 9 people for this, and every single one of them had Rogue 5th. And I think that's insane, first of all. I didn't think... This is by far the biggest poll that I've done. But for them to all come out 5th place, I think is actually insane. So, the consensus definitely has them as the 5th best team. Kind of in their own tier, even, if you want to talk about it like that. Which I understand, but for me, they fall just below the team that comes in 5th. Like I said, they do have points that I'm excited about. I'm just very, very worried about how this bot lane will gel. If things can come together, if the bot lane can be, sustainable, and you can kind of let Odo and Larson be 2 really good solo lanes, Malrang clicks, I could see this team being a lot better than 6th for sure, but I'm just a little bit worried to take that leap in my power rankings myself. Coming in at number 5 for me in the power rankings, I know some people are going to be upset about this. It feels like I hitch my wagon to this team every single year, but I have to trust my process, and my process says that this is the number 5 team in the power rankings, and that for me is going to be Excel. I do have them finally making the playoffs and actually being better than a lot of people expect. They really didn't change much, and some of you might be questionable as to why a team can go from out of the playoffs to in the playoffs without having changed much, but I will explain my thought process in just a second. Let's go over what their roster is looking like. It's looking like Finn in the top lane, Marcoon in the jungle, Nukeduck in the mid lane, Patrick as the AD carry, and Adviena as the support. There's actually a lot to like about this team if you really delve into it, in my opinion. You may be asking yourself, well, what makes them a playoff team this year if they really didn't change much? You've been really critical of teams that don't change much when they aren't playoff teams, and you're right, I am critical of teams like that in the LPL and the LCK, for sure. I have been in previous videos, but there is something a little bit different here about Excel, and that is the fact that they did not have their full team for a majority of Summer Split, or at least their best possible team for a majority of Summer Split. I really, really do believe that the additions of Marcoon and Adviena mid-split last year for Excel completely changed the outlook of this team and completely changed how they played on the Rift every single week. I really, really do believe that if this team were to have been, full strength, if it were to have been Marcoon and Adviena the entire year, this team would have made playoffs. They played like they would have. They were winning a lot towards the end of summer, and I believe that's going to continue into 2022 here. You upgrade a little bit here with Finn coming in the top lane. Finn versus Crazy, you want to make the debate, that's fine. Finn had a horrendous year on CLG last year, but like I said in my LCS video, or at least my LCS offseason video, it's hard for me to properly grade a lot of the players on CLG last year, just because everything went so wrong that everybody played their absolute worst. That is not the skill level of, I think, any of the players on that team. But, there is something to be said for, you could argue that Finn was the worst player in LCS last year, a worse league. So, there is a lot to talk about in that respect, but that's not Finn's skill level. Even if he isn't this good, top laner, he's still a fine weak side top laner that, I wouldn't expect to really struggle a ton without resources, which he's not going to get a lot of resources this year, but that should be fine because you actually have a lot of talent in the other roles. Let's start first with the guy who I have hyped up forever, and that's going to be Patrick here in the bot lane. I still believe he is a world-class support, what am I talking about? World-class AD carry, at least in terms of mechanical skill. I'm not sure there is a better team fighter in the West at any role than Patrick. He is so adept that if he gets to late game with an even, kind of stretch, I expect him to win team fights for Excel. He is that good at that stretch of the game. Adviena made him even better because he made that laning phase a lot more safe for Patrick, which I think is really good. He's always been a little bit too hesitant to pull the trigger in laning phase. That's always been my criticism of Patrick. But Adviena, I think, is a lot more aggressive in that respect and has created a lot more chances for this bot lane to kind of show off their apparent skill. I think the other huge point that I'm excited about is going to be Marcoon here in the jungle, who was phenomenal last year. He was pretty much everything you wanted in a rookie jungler and more. I have him ranked as the 5th best jungler in the LEC. I think he could absolutely be higher than that by the end of spring if things go right. He was really, really good in 2021, and I think he could be really, really good in 2022. I think the synergy between him and Nukeduck was really, really good. The synergy between him and Adviena was actually what was most impressive for me. Their macro plays early in the game were really, really solid. When you have two, I want to say team fight specialists in Nukeduck and Patrick, for them to be able to create so much early game to kind of help them either get leads or at least keep them from falling behind, I think it's a really, really good combination for them here. Nukeduck is still on this team. I think Nukeduck is a good player. I don't want to say he's underrated because I don't think he's, completely this special mid laner. He's fantastic or whatever. But I think he's a good player. I think he is an LEC caliber mid laner. And I think especially when it comes to late game team fighting, he does still have a lot to offer in terms of winning for an LEC team. Overall, do I think that they got a ton better this offseason? No. But do I think that they were pretty good to begin with? Yes. And do I think the teams that were above them, kind of in the rankings last year, got worse? Yes. I think 2 playoff teams from last year, both in Misfits and Rogue, I think got, you know, especially worse. And I could definitely see Excel kind of exceeding what they were able to put out last year, purely from kind of the teams around them becoming a little bit worse. And then the continued growth of their young stars here in Marcoon, at Vienna. You know, Patrick, I think, is still a really, really good keep for this team. And Nuktuk is a really solid player as well. I think there's a lot to like about this team. And I think a lot of people are going to be surprised with how talented they actually are when games start up here. Moving on to number 4 in my power rankings. From this point on, I'm pretty sure everybody is going to be at least a little bit more comfortable with my rankings. But coming in number 4 for me is going to be the reigning kings of Europe, the reigning kings of the LEC, the Mad Lions. So, yeah, this team did change up a lot this offseason. They lose out Humanoid here, which I think is a pretty big loss, and they lose out Carzzy as well. But we're going to go over who they added here and what their team is looking like in 2022. In the top lane, it's going to be Armut. In the jungle, it's going to be El Yoya. In the mid lane, it's going to be Reeker. In the AD carry position, it will be Unforgiven, and then support is Kaiser. An interesting lineup here. Some pieces, obviously, that are great, because they are pieces that just won back-to-back LEC titles. Kaiser is, in my opinion, the best support in the LEC. I know Hylissang is making a really, really close call for that, and I completely understand if you want to put Hylissang number 1, but for me, Kaiser's just a tad bit more consistent, and I like what he is able to put out, especially when games matter in the playoffs. El Yoya was a huge, huge, huge surprise for this team last year. He was phenomenal. He was one of the best junglers in the world last year. He really came in and was great from day one. He was everything this team wanted and more. And if he can continue to grow, he could very easily be the best jungler in the league by the end of Spring Split. I could very much believe that. In fact, as I'm sure you are aware from my LEC offseason video, the difference between the number 1 jungler and the number 4 jungler, in my opinion, is so minuscule. I mean, if you wanted to put anybody in that top 4 at number 1, I would completely understand. There wouldn't be an ounce of shock in my voice. It so happens that all of the top 4 are in the top 4 teams. If you wanted to put El Yoya as the best jungler in the LEC, I wouldn't be mad. You know, I don't know how I could be. So, moving on to their additions. Oh, I guess I didn't talk about Armut. Armut's also really, really solid. His champion pool is a little bit funky, but in a way where I think it really works for this team. He's versatile in the sense of he can play almost any kind of pick, but he definitely has the ones that he likes a little bit more. I think that's fine. I have him ranked above Odo Omne for a reason. Odo is a fantastic player. I think Armut just gives you that carry potential that Odo doesn't. Those 3 right there are an incredibly strong trio to build around. Arguably the best support in the region. You could make the case that it's the best jungler in the region as well, or at least one of the best junglers in the region. And then one of the better tops in the region. I think that is a fantastic trio, and there's a reason that that trio did win back-to-back LEC titles and make it to the quarterfinals of Worlds. But you are bringing in 2 rookies to replace 2 of your more established players here in the mid and bot positions, 2 of the more carry-oriented positions. Let's talk about the one I'm more excited about first, which is going to be Reeker coming in here in the mid lane. I'm incredibly high on Reeker. I think he's going to be a very, very solid mid laner. I think he is going to be a top team caliber mid laner. I'm not necessarily projecting that from day one, but he's someone who I've had my eye on for a really long time now coming out of the ERLs, and I'm really, really excited to see him get a chance here on a good team as well in Mad Lions, not a bottom tier team where he's going to have to do everything. He's going to be able to grow here. Hopefully him and El Yoya have some sort of synergy together. You guys know how much I stress that mid-jungle synergy. Hopefully those 2 can really connect, because talent-wise, they really could be one of the better mid-jungle duos in the entire league if things work out for Reeker. Unforgiven, I'm not as sold on. I think he has good moments and good moments on his tape, but when you're comparing him to other kind of quote-unquote rookie AD carries coming in this year, players like Flakked, players like Xmatty, he just doesn't have the same kind of hype as I think those other 2 do for me. That's not to say he's a bad player, I just didn't necessarily see it from him nearly as much as I did from the other 2. I still think that he is going to be probably way better than this 9th place ranking that I'm giving him, just because he's playing with what I have as the best support in the region. and a support who likes to make plays, an engaged support, someone who loves the Alistar, someone who loves the Leona. Kaiser is definitely not afraid to make plays for his AD carry. I think he's going to look a lot better than this Snipe. I'm just not necessarily sold on him mechanically being everything that this team is going to need if they want to be a title contender. And it's the reason that I have them here 4th, just outside of the kind of top 3, which I think a lot of people would consider to be kind of the big 3 right now. I'm a little bit worried about their ability to stack up mechanically with the top 3 teams. Kaiser's phenomenal, Elyoya's phenomenal, Armut's phenomenal. Reeker, I think, might be able to get there. I'm not sure if he's going to be there by spring, which is why I have this team 4th and why I have him 7th. And I'm not sure Unforgiven is really the kind of player who is going to be able to get there. But, you know, obviously these guys can prove me wrong. They're in a perfect scenario to learn and grow, which I think is exactly what you want. If you're a young player, to come into a team with, you know, this kind of winning experience, you know, not only does the coaching staff know how to win, but the players that are still on the team know how to win as well. I think that's a great environment to learn and grow. I think they could definitely surprise a few people and maybe exceed this ranking here. The consensus does have them at 4 as well, but somebody did place them as high as 2 in the power rankings, which I think would be a miracle season. I would say a fantastic season. If Mad Lions can make the finals here, I think they'd be nothing but ecstatic about that result. So, you know, if they can go ahead and compete, I think that would be really, really good for them. But for me, they're just on the outside of that competition territory. With some improvements, maybe they'd be able to get there. But they still have a fantastic core and a really good group of young guys that they can learn and build around. So I'm excited for the future of Mad Lions, but maybe not so much right now. Now we are getting into the top 3 teams in the LEC. These are ones that I think are pretty consensus as the top 3, at least from what I have seen from not only people I've talked to, but also pretty much everybody seems to agree on this. Coming in at 3rd for me, at the bottom of that tier, is going to be G2 Esports, the former kings of Europe, the former unbeatable dominant force. They are definitely a very different looking G2 team, and that we will get into. Their lineup is looking like Broken Blade in the top lane, Yankos in the jungle, Caps in the mid lane, and then Flocked and Targamas coming in as your bottom lane here. Of course, there's a lot to like about this team. It's still G2, and at the end of the day, you still have Caps. You still have Caps in the mid lane. He is still, in my opinion, the most valuable player in the LEC. I think it's really, really hard for me to say anything otherwise. G2, quote-unquote, had a down year last year. They were still phenomenal in the regular season, but they had, quote-unquote, a down year last year because they didn't make the World Championships. Caps was great throughout the entire year. I don't think that there was a point in time where I was really that worried about Caps. He's just phenomenal. There's only so much that I can say about Caps that isn't retreading on what people already say, but he can play every style. He is a fantastic carry with resources, but he's also really, really good at being, you know, efficient with what he is given. If he's given no ganks in a game, he can still win lane as long as he's not like hard camped or whatever. And even when he's hard camped, he's still going to be useful in team fights. He's just your perfect mid laner. He can do pretty much anything you want him to do. You're bringing Yankos back here. I do have Yankos listed as the best jungler in the league. That is controversial, but like I said, 1 to 4, I mean, you want to put Yankos 4th? Sure. You want to put him 1st? Sure. Like, the difference between those rankings is so minuscule to me. It's almost not even worth putting a number there, because honestly, those 4 players, a lot of them are so different, but they're also just, they're all so good. And so it's really hard for me to make that statement. I put Yankos at number 1, just, I like the consistency, but that's really the only reason. I mean, it's honestly as simple as that. But yeah, Yankos is a great player. He is probably the best supportive jungler in the world. You know, I think you could really make that argument. The best, I don't want to say supportive, the best facilitating jungler in the world. He's perfect at that playstyle. He makes everyone else on his team look like $1 million. And that for me is just incredibly valuable, especially when you have talent elsewhere. Where I'm really excited about this team, and where I think that they hit home run, at least in my opinion, is bringing Targamas in as the support. I know he's not officially a rookie, because he played a few years ago, I believe, for Giants. It was in that era where everybody was blue. Giants was blue, H2K was blue. I feel like every single roster was blue back in the day, but I believe he did play for Giants. He's phenomenal. He was, in my opinion, the best player on K-Corp this past year, which I think might surprise a lot of people. There were a lot of really good players on K-Corp, but for me, the best player was Tarkmas. I thought he was phenomenal. His macro sense of like him needing to be in places and his ability to make plays and roam, and it's just perfect. I mean, he has such a phenomenal understanding of the game. I think he's going to come in and he's going to link up with Yankos. I think it's going to be a lethal duo going forward. I think Targamas by the end of spring is pretty easily going to be talked about as one of the best supports in the West. I think he is that good. I'm a little bit down on the other two in a sense, only because of consensus opinion though. Let's talk about Broken Blade, who at this point I feel like has become a meme on my channel because I'm low on Broken Blade, and the comment section loves to tell me that I'm stupid for being low on Broken Blade, and Broken Blade's a really good player. Broken Blade is mechanically phenomenal as a player. I think he's really, really solid. His laning phase is good. It's just the problem I have with Broken Blade is the same problem I have with a player like Bubu over in the LPL. It's if he's not winning, he's losing. And that is a problem in the top lane in a role that is expected to theoretically, especially nowadays, not get the same kind of resources as the bot lane and the mid lane would. He is a very resource-heavy top laner. When he's ahead, he can carry games. When he's given resources, when he's ganked a lot, when he's the focal point of a team, he can really be phenomenal. He can carry a team to playoffs. But when he's not given those resources, he can be a huge negative for a team as well. And that's just why I have him at 6 here. I have him just below kind of that upper tier, just below Odoamne in that instance of players that are good, but not, they have flaws. Broken Blade is a good player, but does he have flaws? Yes. And are those flaws exploited every once in a while? Yes, they absolutely are. More so than I think the top tier of top laners are. But enough about Broken Blade. You also bring in Flakked here, who I think is a really solid player, maybe a little overhyped going into the season. While Flakked, I think, is really, really solid, I don't know if he's going to be that day one, like, superstar. I do think pairing him up with Targamas is going to both help and hurt his ability. Flakked, Targamas being such a good engaged support is going to help his laning phase, but also Targamas being such a heavy roam support, I think, is going to hurt him in the sense of he's going to be playing weak side a lot, I think. Either way, I think he's still a really solid pickup, and definitely he was for sure one of the better ERL AD carries last year. And it's still a really solid addition here for G2. His social media game as well is on point, which is perfect for G2 because that is their brand. So overall, I have them powering third. The consensus has them third. They had them as high as third, as low as fourth. Some people think they might fall out of the top three here. I think some things would have to go wrong for that to happen. For me, the top three is pretty clear, at least in my opinion. I think they just unfortunately aren't one of the two super teams in the LEC this year. They're still a really solid team with the best player in the LEC in Caps, but they have flaws and they have places where they can be exploited, maybe more so than the top two teams. So for me, they fall third. Overall, though, when you're talking about a team that disappointed last year, do I think they'll disappoint again this year? No. I think this team is going to bounce back in a strong way and really be one of the contenders in Europe again. Moving into the top two, we have made it to the top two, the two super teams that were created this offseason. Which one's going to come in number two? Which one's going to come in number one? For me, number two is going to be Fnatic. Fnatic is a fantastic team, but they do have a few more flaws, at least in comparison to Vitality, who, spoiler alert, is number one. They're the only team left. Whereas I think Fnatic maybe has a little more question marks going around them, at least in spring. Let's go over what they're rocking this year. They're rocking Wonder in the top lane, Razork in the jungle, Humanoid in the mid lane, Upset, and Hylissang as your returning bot lane here. This is such a mechanically talented roster. It's actually insane. The the amount of pure skill that this Fnatic team has is almost unrivaled. And I do think that mechanically speaking, they are better than Vitality. I think you look at someone like Upset, who is probably, I wouldn't even say probably, he is the most mechanically skilled AD carry in the West. He has that takeover mentality that can do a lot for teams. You have Hylissang, who's one of the more mechanically intensive supports. Humanoid, who is probably one of the more mechanically intensive mid laners I've seen in a while. Razork, who's phenomenal in the jungle. Wonder, who is Mr. Hands up in the top lane. The amount of pure skill that this Fnatic team has is pretty much unrivaled. They do have a couple flaws, which I'll get to after I go over the players, but let's talk about the bot lane because they're returning first. Upset and Hylissang, probably the two most important players to bring back in my opinion. The two best players on this team, the two that propelled them to Worlds. Say what you will about the Upset situation, I don't want to talk about it. But those two, at least for me, for sure, propelled them to the World Championships this past year. Upset was phenomenal. He was the third best AD carry in Europe last year, behind only Reckless and Hansama, who are both gone now. So, by de facto, he's the best AD carry in Europe now. I was kind of down on him going into last year, but he proved me wrong. He's just mechanically so good. And Hylissang does make him better. Hylissang is, I don't know how much I can say about Hylissang that hasn't already been said. He's one of the more talked about players, obviously, in the entire world. But, you know, just this perfect aggressive support for a team like this that is probably just going to want to be on the gas pedal all the time. You can make the argument Hylissang is the best support in the LEC. What I don't think you can make the argument of is that this will probably be the best bot lane in the LEC. I don't know how many bot lanes are even going to be contending for that because these two really are that good. But let's talk about Humanoid as well, somebody who was in the MVP conversation last year for Mad Lions, a team that won back-to-back championships, coming in here to replace Nisqy. Completely different styles. In fact, I'm not sure you could have two more different mid laners than Humanoid and Nisqy. Nisqy obviously being that more support, passive, play with my jungler and, you know, kind of help out my team mid laner. Humanoid being a very resource dependent carry style jungler or mid laner, I should say. And that I think is both good and bad for the team. Humanoid is phenomenal with resources. He can really take over games, but he's also prone to mistakes, which can happen when you play as aggressively and as forward as Humanoid does. I'm definitely not saying he's not worth it because of that, but still, it is worth pointing out that it is a very big style shift here in the mid lane for Fnatic. You bring in Razork here in the jungle from Misfits. He had a phenomenal end of summer with VTO. He and VTO were a huge reason to me why that team did end up making playoffs. And I think that's going to continue on in 2022 for Razork, as he's now just surrounded with more talent. Essentially, a better version of VTO, or at least a more polished version of VTO here in the mid lane with Humanoid, a much better bot lane, and a better top laner as well. I think gives Razork so many options for where he can play to. He loves to carry games, but he actually showed in summer that he's really adept at facilitating as well. Just a really versatile jungler. Like I said, 4-1 you could pretty much have in any order. If you wanted to call Razork the best jungler in the LEC, I wouldn't even be that upset with you. And then there is a little bit of projection here in the top lane with Wonder being my second ranked top laner. He has certainly been the best top laner in the LEC before. And for him to get there again, I wouldn't even be that surprised, but that is definitely projection because last year he was not that. I would argue he was the weak point for G2 last year. And, you know, that's a little bit concerning here coming into Fnatic, obviously. There are motivation concerns with Wonder that I don't really believe in. I believe this year he's really dialed in. You know, if he wasn't last year, he's definitely going to be this year. I believe that he is going to return to the Wonder that we saw in 2018 and 2019 when he was one of the most dominant top lane solo laners in the world. I think we're going to be getting that back here in 2022. My only concern with this team is the macro play. This team is so on the gas pedal. There really isn't a lot of players on this team that are used to taking a back seat, maybe other than Wonder. There really aren't players on this team that aren't used to having a ton of resources dedicated into them. Upset was very resource heavy last year for Fnatic, was like the resource guy for Fnatic last year. Razork throughout his entire career has kind of been the resource guy for Misfits. Humanoid was the resource guy for Mad Lions. I don't exactly know how that's going to play out, and that for me is just enough concern for me to put this team at second instead of first. Do I trust that they'll be able to figure it out? Yes. But does that mean that they're going to be better than number one? In my opinion, probably not. But are they phenomenal in every aspect? Yes. The consensus has them at number one. Most people I polled had them at number one. They were as high as 1, as low as 3, which I think is a little disrespectful. But, either way, Fnatic, it looks phenomenal. They are one of the 2 super teams in Europe for a reason. If they won the LEC and went to the semifinals or the finals of the World Championships, I don't even know if I'd be surprised. They are that mechanically talented if they can figure out who gets the resources and how they get the resources. I think this team could be just a dominant force in the LEC. And finally, that is going to bring us to the team that I have as my favorite to win the LEC Spring Split in 2022. And if you're counting, I think I said it in the last post anyways, you would know that it's going to be Team Vitality. The Killer Bees here coming in at number 1. Their roster from top to support is looking like Alphari in the top lane, Selfmade in the jungle, Perks and the mid lane. I almost said at AD carry. Not anymore. Carzzy at AD carry, and then Lebrav at support. This team, to me, is just a tad bit more cohesive than Fnatic, but man, both of those teams are just so ridiculously good that differentiating between the two is going to be very, very difficult. This Vitality team way overperformed in summer, in my opinion. You add Selfmade because he's no longer wanted on Fnatic. You add Crown Shot as well. This team kind of was interesting last year, and we know they've been trying to build a super team for years. They finally complete it going into 2022, adding Alphari, adding Perks, adding Carzzy. You keep Selfmade. Even Lebrav, I think, is underrated going into this year, but we're to talk about with the best of this team. Let's talk about the top lane first. Let's talk about Alphari. He had a phenomenal year on Team Liquid. I don't think you could say otherwise. Obviously, going to NA, people were a little bit concerned about whether or not he would just kind of regress like a lot of other regress in lane at least, like a lot of other European imports have, but he absolutely did not. He was the best top laner in the West last year, in my opinion. He was so dominant in lane, it was actually disgusting. And top lane in the LCS isn't even that bad, but he was just so much better than everybody. I do firmly believe that he will come in and do kind of a similar thing here in the LEC. I think he's phenomenal. We were talking about resource guys with Fnatic. Alphari is a heavy resource guy, but I think lucky for him, you look around at the other big lanes here, and you're looking at 2 lanes that are quite comfortable without resources. And I think Alphari could be the piece that this team wants to play through just because of how mechanically talented he is and how much he can really take over games when he is ahead. But outside of him, you have Selfmade here in the jungle returning. A carry jungler, traditionally likes to play those assassins, likes to play those more carry picks. But he showed last year that he is actually still really adept on the more passive picks, the more bruisery picks as well. Selfmade's just a good player. For me, I have him as the second best jungler. If you wanted to put him 4th, I understand as well. If you wanted to put him 1st, mechanically, I would understand that as well. He's just a really, really solid jungler. He played really well last year. I think he maybe got a little underrated last year just because nobody was watching Vitality. And obviously being kicked off Fnatic, there was a lot of negative attention surrounding that. So for him, I think he's probably a little bit underrated going into 2022. He's a phenomenal jungler. You bring in Perks here in the mid lane, who some people are going to have upset that I have higher than Humanoid, but, whatever, deal with it. It's Perks. The greatest Western player of all time. He is everything you could want in a mid laner, like I said, with Caps. Essentially, he is that. He's a little bit less adept at being, super duper resource heavy, and he can sometimes get caught out in macro plays later in games, as we saw at the World Championships. But Perks, other than that, is pretty much phenomenal. He is a super resource independent mid lane carry, which I think is an incredibly valuable resource because you actually don't have to gank him a lot for him to get leads and for him to be useful in team fights later in the game. He is just that mechanically talented, and I think that is going to pair up really well with Alphari because you can spend a lot more time over on the top side than mid lane and even bot lane here. Your bot lane with Carzzy and Lebrav. I think this is going to be a really underratedly good bot lane. Carzzy is someone who I've kind of been high on for a little while now. I know a lot of people see the bad parts of Carzzy, but I just see an aggressive player, a player who likes to make plays in team fights and doesn't necessarily need attention early game to be useful late. As you can see, there's a theme here on Vitality and a reason that I put them number 1. Labrov, I think, actually has been a little bit underrated for years. I'm actually guilty of that for a little while now. Last year, I underrated Labrov, absolutely, for sure. But this year, I'm not going to do that. He has been one of the more consistent supports in the LEC for quite a while now. I have him just above Targamas here. He's probably not as good as Targamas. I just have trouble putting Targamas above somebody who's been so consistently good in the LEC without him ever having really played a game at this level in the LEC. But Labrov is a really, really solid player. And I think he is a positive to this team and not necessarily a weak point or a negative. This bot lane is going to be aggressive, is going to make mistakes, but they're also going to get you advantages. And like I said, Carzzy is just such a phenomenal team fighter later in the game. I think this team's late game is exceptional. I think their team fighting is essentially perfect. Alfari is a great team fighter, Perkz is a great team fighter, Carzzy's a great team fighter, Selfmade's a great team fighter. I do not see a weakness. If this team goes even in the mid game, I see them winning almost every game. Kind of similar to what G2 was back in like 2019, where if this team has like a 2k gold deficit going into 25-30 minutes, they're still the favorites to win the game because they will execute team fights better than you because they are just that good. So yeah, Vitality's phenomenal. Do I think that they're on the same level as Fnatic? Yeah. And can I understand why the consensus puts them at 2 and Fnatic at 1? Yes. I think Fnatic, maybe hands-wise, mechanically speaking, is a little bit more talented. Humanoid's a little bit more mechanically talented than Perkz. Upset is more mechanically talented than Carzzy. I can definitely see a world in which you could say, like, I don't know if I trust Vitality in that respect, but for me, just the play styles of Vitality blend together so perfectly that it's hard for me to say anything other than I expect them to win the LEC and to honestly make a dent at MSI this year, and hopefully they can fulfill those expectations because they've been waiting a long time for the super team and it's finally here. All right, folks, we have done it. We have gone over all 10 teams in the LEC, top to bottom, power ranked them all. I hope you guys enjoyed. I put a lot of effort into these videos. Obviously, the LEC one is always more controversial than any other because LEC fans are by far the most passionate. I don't even think it's nearly as close. I'm sure at this point I've already gotten 800 screaming comments at me in the comments section, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Right now on the screen, you're going to be seeing my list for how I power ranked all the positions, top, jungle, mid, ADC, and support, 1 to 10, and now it's transitioning over to the teams, both me and the consensus, how we power rank them. If you guys did enjoy, I would really, really appreciate it if you leave a like. It means a lot. It lets me know you guys are liking these videos. I make these videos for you guys, so I really, really do appreciate when you do that. Obviously, leave a comment about how stupid I am. I love chatting it up with you guys in the comment section below. But other than that, I hope you all are having a fantastic day. I hope you continue to have a fantastic day, and I will see you all later.